Hey everybody, I am Gina Sicard, also known as I am Gina Bianca on Instagram, and this is Gray Blending with Foils. Are you wondering how to attack those baby hair sections that are fragile and hard to foil? I'm going to go through on a very challenging, damaged canvas how to blend gray, brighten areas that need brightening, and how to protect the hair's integrity throughout the entire process. In the audio program, we're going to talk about the initial booking process, how to book color corrections and secure your time. We're going to talk about under-promising and over-delivering to manage your guests' expectations. We're going to talk about how to say no when what your guest wants is not possible or their hair can't handle it. We're going to talk about how to make sure that your guest understands the importance of retail and how to make sure they go home with the best Regiment possible. And we're also going to talk about ongoing maintenance to make sure that their hair looks and feels amazing for years to come. All right, so now that you know what to expect, let's dive into the video. I'm so excited that you're here. I know you're going to love this content.
Okay, let's get started. So, a little context on this guest. She was kind of freaking out about her hair. She emailed everyone in the salon, including me, trying to get in for a color correction, and this is how she showed up. So she had about 6 inches of damage at the ends that was unsalvageable, and she had an appointment early that morning, and the stylist turned her away. Now, I've definitely turned people away and said, hey, you have unrealistic expectations, but this guest was not hopeless, and she was super upset that she was turned away, so she was a little bit traumatized. So she came in for a consultation, and we'll explain more of that in the audio program, but I ended up just doing a quick K18 treatment on her, a gloss, a haircut, and a blow dry. Then she came in a few days later and was ready for her appointment. So this is the before picture after her haircut and after a gloss. For her gloss, I used the Rusk Deepshine Gloss, and I used my favorite toner, which is 9N, 9A, 9G, and a little bit of the BN series. So what was the most challenging about this guest is she had a pretty dark base, and her previous stylist, from what I can tell, was doing a gray coverage on her that was about a level 6. And what that caused was a ton of banding and unnecessary damage to the hair. A little bit of context about this guest is she was really blonde, then she went dark, and then she went blonde again in a short period of time. So her hair is very fragile under there, but her texture is very coarse and wiry, especially around her hairline, and she has naturally curly hair. I started by prepping her with K18, this is the Pro Mist, and I sprayed it all over and brushed it through. You can spray a lot of the K18. They also recommend that you wet the hair first, spray it down, leave it on for 4 minutes, and then dry the hair before application. I already did a K18 treatment on her a few days ago, and I sprayed the K18 throughout the sections as I was foiling, so it worked well for me. As far as her sectioning, I used one of my standard blueprint sectionings. As a colorist, it's very important to work efficiently, and one way to work efficiently is to have a method to your madness. My assistant knows exactly how to set up my tray, exactly how I section, and knows exactly how to help me during a service. I work in a very structured way, so I section the same almost every single time, and I adjust my application to my sectioning. Having this blueprint is great because I know exactly how to get started, and I have a really strong understanding of color placement, so I can adapt no matter what the guest wants with this sectioning. The sectioning is super easy. You just create a mohawk on top with their part somewhere in the middle. Then you take the side sections off the mohawk part right to behind the ear, and then you create a triangle section at the crown of the head. I do a wide triangle so that everything here veils over and covers the back. As you can see here, I'm adding some more K18, and you can see there's a lot of banding and there's a lot of stuff going on in the back. This breakage is probably why the stylist turned her away, because she thought her hair was unsalvageable. But the truth is that breakage happens when the foils at the bottom are left on too long, and the body heat from the neck and back heats them up and causes breakage. So that was a clue to me that no matter what, the foils in the back have to be rinsed soon. And another way you can avoid this is by placing a towel down on the cape to avoid that body heat. Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to let you know what lightener I'm using. I use Rusk hair color, and they have 3 options for lightener. The first option they have is the bright white ammonia-free lightener. This is great for your guests who are pregnant and for anyone who has sensitivity to ammonia. You'll still get 7 levels of lift, and it's very gentle. They also have the Rusk Ultimate Blonde Cream Lightener. This is my favorite lightener ever. It's perfect for clients who have fragile hair, or honestly anyone's hair, when you need 7 levels of lift. This lightener lifts amazing, and the consistency is fabulous. I use it for anything on the scalp. I use it for foliage, balayage, my regular foils, and so much more. I recommend this lightener to anybody who loves keeping the hair healthy and who loves that creamy consistency. They also have the Ultimate Blonde Blue Powder Lightener. This lightener is the heavy lifter and lifts 9 levels. Sometimes I'll switch to the Ultimate Blonde during my services if I need all of the foils on the top to catch up with the back, because it is a faster working lightener. It's great to have these 3 options, because instead of raising my developer up through the top, which I definitely do sometimes, I like switching to the blue powder lightener because it's faster lift. So instead of changing my developer, I change my lightener. This is a great tip for blonding specialists if you want to avoid using a higher developer and you want to just work with different tools and relying on the lightener instead of the developer. The Ultimate Blonde Blue Powder Lightener has a great consistency and also gets really creamy. You can mix them 1:1 all the way up to 1:2, which is great to have a flexible mixing ratio for all of your techniques. You won't lose the strength of the lightener by adjusting the mixing ratio. You're going to continue to get that amazing lift. I want to just mention that not all clients need 9 levels of lift. That is why I love the cream lightener. It's my all-time favorite, and I highly recommend that you try it. It's one of the best lighteners I've used in my entire career. On this guest, however, I used the cream lightener the entire time, and I started with 10 volume, working my way up to 20 volume developer.
So before we get started, I want to just remind you and let you know that the way that I teach may be different than the way that you've learned in the past. Whenever I'm foiling, I always count my weaves. I always say that a 3 weave is the chunkiest, a 5 weave is still chunky but a little less, a 7 weave is my favorite weave. It is natural but you could still see it. And then when you get to the 9 and the 12 baby lights, that is for blending the background and softening the base. So through this entire tutorial, I counted my weaves. They're between 9 and 12 and sometimes 7 depending on my section size. But I wanted to throw that out there so that you understand that it is so important to be consistent with your weaves. If you are consistent with your weaves, your looks will be so much more blended. So whenever you want to use gray blending techniques, remember that you're blending. So you want to use between a 7 and a 12 weave.
So starting in the back right quadrant, I'm going in with a tiny section where I almost just follow her hairline, and I'm taking a baby weave. I'm going to be foiling the bottom of the weave so it is as close to the skin as possible, as close to the hairline as possible. Now she has some serious breakage down here. I'm not trying to add more, so I'm just tapping at the root, and as you can see, I'm fighting with my foil a little bit to keep it snug to the base. I avoid the ends completely, fold the foil, and secure it. I'm using the Framar Big Papa foils cut in half. I'm gonna move through and go through this slowly with you so you can learn some of my top foiling techniques, and then we'll speed it up a little bit once you get the picture. So I'm going through, taking my neck section, and it's a very small section because I want to leave barely any reserve. So I'm going in and taking very, very small sections and then weaving off of there. As you can see, my lightener is nice and creamy, and I'm also using the Framar Big Daddy brush. All of the names are so funny at Framar, but I love the big pop of foils and the Big Daddy brush. I'm taking my neck section, and you'll see this is my real-time application. Each foil only takes about 30 seconds, and I try to work as efficiently as possible. So I'm going through, taking my next weave, anchoring my foil in nice and snug to the base, and as you can see with my left hand, I'm keeping my tension as I glue the product down close to the base but not reaching past the foil line. Then I close the foil and secure it. I'm continuing up the back panel, taking small sections and weaving about 7 times. Because of the size of my panel, a 7 weave will do just fine. I'm going in, anchoring it, keeping that tension, and that is going to keep the foil snug to the root. I'm going in, applying and gluing down right at the base, and then I'm just grabbing the blonde pieces that I see and moving them to the side and painting through the bottom where it's really dark. At this point, as I get higher up into her hair, I have to start picking out a lot of the blonde to ensure that I'm not overlapping and damaging it. I know this can be intimidating for a stylist to foil like this because it does take quite a bit of time, but it is going to be better for the hair in the long run, and you'll have a lot less hair in the sink when you're rinsing. So I'm going in and taking my next section, and as you can see with my left hand, I'm keeping that tension and I'm picking away at the blonde pieces. For now I can do it with my fingers, but as I move up the hair, I'm going to start picking through with my comb. And I'm going to show you exactly what not to do when you're doing this because it's going to affect the gray blending. While we're talking about foiling, I want to just let you know that if you want to become faster, you have to have a system. If you have a strict system with how you do hair, your brain will be clicking on and know what comes next. A lot of the time in the salon is eaten up by not making decisions quickly enough, not knowing where to start, and not knowing what to use. So for me, I love making sure I use my same sectioning, I'm confident in the products that I'm using, and I'm able to make decisions quickly. This confidence comes from education, and you're gonna have that same confidence the more classes that you take. So I went in and I glued it down, and now I picked up the hair and I'm just picking out the blonde and putting it to the side. I'm going in and lightening through those ends, and then I close up the foil. Now when I rinsed her, she did have quite a bit of shedding, but it's hard to know if that was from me lightening it or from her last service. There was not enough shedding to cause concern, and she has so much hair that she's not going to miss that hair at all. We'll talk about how to avoid that breakage in a second, but I want you to look at how I'm foiling right now. I took my weave, and then with my comb, I picked out the blonde hair before anchoring the foil. This is how you should not do it, because as you can see, when I anchor in the foil, it's going to show up a little bit weird for the weave. I did this one foil just to kind of show you. This is going to leave a streak or a line in the hair. I was trying something new as I was foiling it, and I decided right then and there, absolutely not, I'm not doing that again. But I'm glad I did it so that I could show you. So for the next section, I'm going to continue working my way up the head, gluing where I want my saturation and brightness to begin, and then picking out those blonde pieces, putting them to the side, and closing up the foil. I'm going to continue on, and as you can see, she's pretty dark in the back, but I'm going to blend all of that out and get her as light as I can. And as you can see, I'm coloring a lot of that dark hair, and I'm using 10 volume. To avoid breakage, you want to be mindful of body heat, you want to be mindful of overlapping, and you want to be mindful of how the foils are laying on top of each other. Most of the breakage happens in heavily foiled areas where the foils are on top of each other and it gets really, really warm. Most lightener brands recommend not using heat during the processing because this heat can cause a lot of breakage. So you're gonna have to use your own judgment when you use heat. Sometimes I'll use heat just up at the top if I'm trying to speed it up slightly. I'm not against using heat, but if I do, I'll use those heat lamps and I'll make sure it's kind of far away and not going directly onto the foils. Foils conduct heat, so they do get really, really hot. So if you have damaged hair or blonde hair and you're overlapping and the foils are stacked on top of each other, this is a recipe for breakage. In the sink, you'll know right away if there's breakage because as you rinse, you're gonna feel the hair feeling like spaghetti. You're gonna feel it being really, really soft, and you're gonna see the ends that they're broken. I'm telling you this because I've been there, and it's not a good feeling at all. When I do color corrections like this in the sink, I'll shampoo everything out. I'll condition it with a really thick conditioner, and then I grab a brush and I start brushing it through gently. I do this because any shedding that's going to happen, I want it to happen in the sink, and I don't want it to happen in my chair while I'm blow drying her or getting her ready for the blow dry. I don't go through and rip through it with a brush. I use a very gentle brushing method, and I just kind of get control of the hair so I could take a better look. But at that point in the service, you'll know if there's a lot of breakage. So of course, we want to do everything possible to avoid that breakage. So make sure you're not overlapping on blonde hair that's really processed, that doesn't need to be lifted. And make sure you're using a low volume developer, not letting the hair over process or get too hot. So as you can see, I'm getting toward the end of the back sections. I'm working my way up to that triangle section. In the back, you can see I'm going on a horizontal diagonal. That means that the section is diagonal, but it's more horizontal than diagonal. Horizontal placement gives you coverage like a wall. It's like a wall of color, a lot of coverage. Diagonal gives you a softer color placement like a curtain. By combining these two and having a horizontal diagonal section, you'll get a lot of coverage, but soft coverage. Now that I'm moving into the triangle section, I'm going to show you how to pivot into the section. So I broke the triangle up into two sections, and now I'm walking it back. So as you can see, I'm taking sections, trying to make my way horizontal again, but I'm walking the sections back. So I'm really almost going in reverse to find my first section. Instead of fighting with it and taking that first section and clipping on the foils, I'm just working my way back until I can get the smallest section and the most straight section going horizontally. So I'm taking my first section here, a nice tiny horizontal weave, and I'm going to start there, and that will help me pivot from horizontal diagonal to horizontal. In this triangle, depending on the look that you want, you can foil horizontally, diagonally, vertically, or a combination of all of them. I'm going horizontal because I want to have complete control over how the hair falls. This triangle section falls like a veil over the entire back of the head. By foiling horizontally, I can customize the section completely. For this guest, she's just getting highlights normal with weaves, but if I had a guest who wanted chunkier highlights, or if I had a guest who wanted a lived-in color, what I can do is I could adjust where I'm gluing if I'm doing a foliage and feather up. It's a really easy way to get a quick result through the back. I don't always foil the back horizontally, this triangle, but I have to be honest, for the most part, I foil horizontally and customize my weaves. I'm still working my way up, taking tiny, tiny initial sections and weaving off of those. As you can see, there is very little reserve left behind. I'm taking super tiny sections, weaving off of it. Now I'm using my bigger foils, my uncut Big Papa foils, to cover all of that area. That section could not be lightened on the ends, so I just did the root and moved on. I'm going to continue with horizontal weave all the way up to the top of the head, taking tiny, tiny sections for that amazing lift and to get really, really close to the scalp. As you can see, my foils are super close. They're nice and tiny sections, which means I'll get amazing lift. Something to remember is that the smaller the section, the lighter the result, and the closer to the scalp you can get. By doing my sections really, really small, my initial sections, and leaving out a very, very tiny bit of reserve, this is going to give me the gray blending look without using a root color. If I take bigger sections, too much of the gray will be left behind to camouflage it. If you're struggling with your foils bleeding, here are a few things to think about. Is your product mixed properly? I like to mix my product 1 part lightener to a little bit more than 1 part developer so it has a nice, thick, creamy consistency, especially if I'm foiling up to the root. Another thing to think about if you're struggling with your foils bleeding is, are you folding your foils too tight? You have to avoid closing the foil too tight. You need to leave room for a little bit of swelling. The Rusk Lightener does not swell very much unless the foil is folded really, really tight and there's nowhere for the lightener to move around. I have not had trouble with the Rusk Lightener bleeding, but I know some lighteners do swell quite a bit. And depending on the client's hair, if they have well water or if they're on medication, the foils could swell and it could have nothing to do with the lightener. If you're taking really large sections, this could cause swelling as well, which will cause the lightener to seep through the top of the foil, causing a bleed mark. Are you feathering the foils where the head shape changes? So in this video, I'm taking such small sections and getting so close to the base that I don't have to feather. If you're taking larger sections than this, you may have to feather slightly at the base to avoid bleed marks. You want to make sure there's not too much product at the baseline because that could definitely cause bleeding. Now that we finished the back section completely, let's go and check our work. At this point, it's a great time to go through and see how the hair is lifting. I'm taking all of the hair and all of the foils, and gently flipping them up and taking a peek at how we're doing. Back here, we know that this is a fragile area, so I pulled the foil and I'm using my comb to kind of feather off the lightener and scrape it off with the comb gently. I then went and got a wet towel and some conditioner. I'm using the Rusk Color RX conditioner, and I'm going in and using that to stop the processing. The video is sped up a little bit, so it looks a little rough, but I'm going really gently with a really wet towel to kind of squeegee the water and the lightener off. I'm checking on the other side. This is where we started. It's definitely done. So I just scraped off the lightener gently, and now I'm taking that wet towel and a little bit of conditioner to stop the processing. As you can see, I'm kind of back brushing up a little bit to blend it, just in case it still processes. It'll be nice and feathered there. Because this area can get really hot, I did check a few more foils up, and I took those out as well. This side was the first side we started with, the other side seemed fine, so I kept going. You'll see later in the video that we pull the entire back section out as the top is finishing processing. I'm going through and bringing all of those foils down and checking for any bleed marks. No matter how clean my sections are, no matter how tiny my sections are, or how perfect I try to be, if there's heat, lightener can swell and you could get a bleed mark. It's nothing to be ashamed about, it's just something to be mindful of. So I'm going through, I didn't have any cotton, so I just grabbed a box of tissues and ripped a few of them up, and I'm going in and just twisting them and putting them in between any areas where I can see the hair at the top of the foil. Sometimes bleed marks happen and it's not the end of the world. If you need to fix a bleed mark, my best recommendation is while the hair is wet to tap it with a gloss 2 levels darker. My favorite thing to use when fixing a bleed mark is the Rusk Xpress Gloss 6NB This gloss processes in 5 minutes, and it's a progressive hair color, so it does get slightly darker and turns into about a 5 NB if you leave it on for more than 5 minutes. I love using this because it's so fast and it gives great coverage, and it's definitely a lifesaver if you have a bleed mark. If I notice a bleed mark right before I'm blow drying, I'll just consolidate the area, tap it with the 6NB, and then I'll start blow drying the rest while that processes. And then take a spray bottle, spray it down, and wipe out the color. So this is the area that I was most concerned about and that I dreaded foiling the most. She has so many coarse, wiry baby hairs, and this is so challenging. But as you can see, I'm doing the same thing I was doing in that triangle section. I'm walking the section back. So I start with a decent sized section, and then I take sections and walk it back until I get to my first section. I'm then doing the same thing I did in the back, and I'm foiling the bottom of the weave with really tight tension, just tapping that base, closing the foil, and moving on. The foils I'm using are the Big Papa foils, cut in half and then cut in half again. They're the perfect size for the hairline, and I'm going through taking the tiniest sections, securing the foil, and then placing a little bit of cotton / tissue paper, whatever you have laying around, in between to make sure the heat of her face does not overprocess those foils. The hairline on this guest was the most tedious part of the whole service, but it is the most important part. I always tell my students, you are only as good as your hairline. So sometimes you gotta slow it down and make sure you are diligent and clean with your sectioning. You can see how wiry and coarse her hair is and how difficult it is to get control of it. I'm taking my next section, which is a slice, and I'm working on a vertical diagonal. Going in and following those same steps, gluing down at the base, and then dusting through if needed. In this area, it's so light that I don't need to dust it through, so I'm just tapping the root. I want to quickly say that remembering the first foil I did at her hairline, foiling the bottom of the weave, is a critical step in the best blending around the hairline. You're going to get right up to the root, and it's going to blend so much better than leaving that reserve. I'm continuing on, taking the tiniest little sections to make sure that her hairline is detailed beautifully. I'm repeating the same steps over and over, but I'm doing slices and weaves. I want to go back to why your foils might be bleeding. Another reason your foils might be bleeding is because your tension is slipping. I have done countless hands-on classes, and I have learned so much from my students. I noticed that a lot of students, instead of gluing where they want their saturation to begin, will load the product onto the foil and then try to glue up. This is so hard to maintain control of the foil, so make sure when you're foiling, you glue where you want your saturation to begin. In this case, I have tight tension and I'm gluing right up to the edge of the foil. This is helping me get the foil to stick down and make sure that the foil does not move. If you notice your foils are slipping a lot, I challenge you to gain great tension like you see here, glue where you want saturation to begin, and only let go of your tension when you're ready to either saturate the ends or close the foil. I repeated the same thing on the other side for her hairline and for her other side. And now I'm moving into her money piece area. As you can see, I already did the other side and I'm going on a diagonal to follow her hairline. I'm starting with these tiny, tiny, tiny little baby hairs, getting good tension as good as I can get, and I'm taking the smallest ever section and weaving it. I know I was telling you to foil the bottom of the weave, but this section is so small it does not even matter. I'm going in, anchoring my foil, gluing it down, and going right ahead and pulling through in the darker areas. The last time she got her hair done, I don't think they did her baby hairs very much, especially around her face, so I am able to pull through slightly in some areas. My next section here, as you can see, I took a rough section, got control, and now I'm taking another section and clipping it off. I want to make sure my sections are really clean and as perfect as possible, because then the foil can get closer to the scalp and I can move quicker. See how tight my tension is? It is so secure, and I'm just going in and tapping that regrowth. I'm repeating that same process, going on a diagonal, and then as soon as I meet the other side, I'm gonna start foiling the sides again to make sure my mohawk is small enough to get some tight foils. I'll show you that in a second. But once I am done with this face frame, I'm gonna kind of move away from this area, and then when I come back to it, I'm gonna pivot again, going from this diagonal placement into a vertical placement, which I'll show you at the top. I've switched over to the side now, and my goal is to just make this mohawk a little bit smaller so I can make sure my foils in the top aren't too big. This is completely optional, but since the head is round at the top, I want to keep my foils as tight as possible. So in this area, I'm going in and just doing a few horizontal weaves, nice and tiny, and making my mohawk smaller. It's so important not to miss any areas of the head when you're doing a gray blending first session like this, because you want to get as much as you possibly can highlighted. For a full highlight like this, I totally understand it can be very tedious and take a long time, but if I were to skip this section, I could have a hole or a dark section, and when she flips her hair to one side or the other, you wouldn't have that gray blending. So I'm doing my due diligence and just making my mohawk a little bit smaller by adding these foils on each side. As you can see, I'm moving to the other side, and I'm gonna go in and do a few more weaves. This is a great technique as well for your guests who have a strong recession on their hairline. If you want to detail their hairline out a little bit more, this horizontal section can allow you to pick up at the hairline, giving you an even more beautiful blended result. I recommend doing this, especially if your guest's hairline dips back. I consider these foils part of the mohawk section. I'm just going in and making sure my mohawk is perfect and just making it a little bit smaller. I'm still going through and picking out those lighter pieces to make sure I don't overprocess her. I want to point out the timestamp. It's 11:35. I've been foiling for 90 minutes. My assistant is helping me by remixing and by making sure that whenever she can, she holds the hair up for me so I can section quicker. If you don't have an assistant, that's totally understandable, but I love working with an assistant because it does help me obviously work quicker. It helps the guests get in and out faster, and honestly, it's so much healthier for the hair if you can get that color on and work quickly. So I'm moving on to the mohawk, and I'm starting in the back. It is so much easier for me to foil this way, so I foil this way for as long as I can until my guest is really cranking her head and neck back. I asked her if she was okay. She said she's good, so I continued to foil like this for as long as possible. I'm now moving into a different placement. So I'm going weave, slice. They're a little bit mixed up. Sometimes I do more weave, sometimes I do more slice, but I'm doing weave, sometimes a slice, but I'm trying to get as much of the hair lightened as possible because there is a pretty significant band. So I'm going in, taking those sections, gluing where I want saturation to begin, picking out those blonde pieces, and then moving on. The foil placement that I would recommend for doing a service like this is weave with a slice right behind it. Weave with a slice right behind it. So basically the only reserve is the reserve from the remainder of the weave. This is going to give you a beautiful full coverage placement where there is just a little bit of hair left out. So it's an almost full coverage placement, which is great for gray blending. If your guests wanted chunkier highlights, you can always do weave with a slice right behind it, or weave with a slice right behind it, and then a slice right behind it. You can make the foils as chunky as you want by stacking your slices back to back. Every weave that you put in between will give you blend. For her hair, I went in with a mixture of weaves and slices to try to correct as much of the band as possible, and I used my judgment as I was going on which to do. As you can see, we're almost done, but it's so crazy that this last section felt like it took forever. I'm making my way into the front now, and remember I told you I was going to be pivoting these diagonals into a vertical placement? Believe it or not, this entire Mohawk section is a vertical placement. When the hair falls and splits, the sections will fall vertically. So what we've been doing up through the top is a vertical weave and slice. It looks like I'm foiling horizontally, but in reality, it's vertical. Anything that I place up there vertically, you're gonna see. That's why it's so important to take really small sections when you're trying to blend out a band and do great coverage. If you have a guest who doesn't have as thick, coarse hair as this, you could always go horizontally, but you will have to take the tiniest sections, and I recommend zigzagging at the part line to make sure that it's soft. As you can see, to pivot, I took a big section and went horizontal and then walked it back to my small section. You could see that band there. Oh my gosh. It was such an intense band throughout this whole service. It's like definitely challenging to do, and I give props to any stylist who will take on a service like this. But now that you're watching this video, I hope that you're confident if this walks through the salon doors. So I'm going through foiling vertically, but it looks horizontal, right? And I'm taking tiny, tiny, tiny little sections, and I've pivoted from my diagonal sections into that vertical placement. So now that I'm in the front, I'm going in and just continuing with those baby weaves and some slices. I'm doing as many foils as I can up here because this is where the band is definitely the strongest, and this is what everyone's going to see. So if you have a guest who doesn't have a really big budget and they just want, you know, the main areas to be done, this Mohawk section, you can definitely get some beautiful gray blending if you just take really small sections up through the top. And as you guys saw, I did her face frame really detailed and beautifully so that it's going to give her a perfect hairline when she pulls back. So if I were gonna do this as a half placement, I don't really like partial, I like half or full. So if I was gonna do a half, I would do the Mohawk and the full sides. It's up to you if you really want to do the triangle, like how much of it you want to do. I would probably do the full triangle because I am really fast and the main expense is your time. So if you work pretty quickly, I would do the whole triangle just to add that value to the service, and it will definitely leave your guests super happy with their hair. So as you can see, we're all done with our application. It's 12:25. I believe we started around 10:15. So it took just over 2 hours to do this full application. As soon as I'm done, I start pulling foils. They're all done, they feel really good, they look good, and I just start pulling the foils so that I don't have to bring her back to the sink and pull foils then. The only thing I would have done differently during this service is I would have waited a little longer to pull the top part of the triangle. I noticed in the sink it was slightly warm, nothing crazy that really bothered me, but I would have let that sit a little bit longer. So make sure you peek at your foils before you pull them. I was really concerned about the health of her hair, and you know, in these services you kind of just go for it, but I would just wait and just double check before you pull it. As you can see, she's got that beautiful blend around her hairline. I am not gonna have to root melt her or root her at all, and that is so amazing when you're doing great coverage services because now her grow out will be foils instead of that harsh line of demarcation. So when you have blondes who have that really full gray, if you do a root on them, they're going to have a line of demarcation. The grow out is not going to be soft. You can diffuse it with highlights, of course, but I would recommending gray coverage with foils for them if they're blonde, so that they have that long lasting result. Then they can come in 8 weeks, so you have something to foil, right? You want to make sure there's enough hair for you to foil, or else you can run into that overlapping. So 8 weeks would be great maintenance for them to come in and do a half, and then maybe do a full highlight once or twice a year. I'm pulling everything out. It lifted beautiful. I love that cream lightener. And this was just with about 10 volume. I possibly went up to 15 volume on the sides, but we don't need a high volume. The lightener is going to process as it goes. So as you can see, it is a little warmer in the top area. I wish I left that in, but it didn't really make a huge difference. I'm using a low pH conditioner. I'm actually using Paul Mitchell, the Detangler. It's on our back bar. It's a really affordable back bar shampoo and conditioner. We have all kinds of shampoos and conditioners on our back bar for our artists, but I wanted to use a low pH, and the Detangler is perfect for that. So what that's going to do is just stop any processing, and it's going to start closing the cuticle slightly. So I'm going through with my wet brush, and I'm just kind of brushing through, getting control over the hair. This is the time where if there's breakage, you're going to know that there's breakage. And then I would stop brushing if there was a lot of breakage and not really break it anymore because any tension that you put on the hair could cause more. But at this point, I like to remove any shedding in the sink and just gently brush it with conditioner on, and we're gonna let the rest process. At this point, it's about 12:30, and we're gonna just let the top foils process a little bit longer. I've taken the liberty of pushing all these foils away from my client's face, and I'm going to be clipping them up gently. And then that gives me a chance to look at the little hairline pieces that have gotten nice and warm from that body heat and from the foils laying on top of it. So if you were to leave them facing forward, that body heat is going to cause more damage than you need. Obviously, we don't want to cause any damage, but anytime you lighten the hair, there is that risk, especially if it's fragile hair. So these little baby hairs I pulled, and I just kind of gently laid them down, and I'm just using a wet towel to wipe that lightener off. Perfect. So it's 1 o'clock now, and we are ready to rinse. It looks so good. I am gently pulling those foils out, and then we're going to start rinsing and toning. I use a lot of foils during my services, and people are always commenting on my Instagram. They're like, what a waste of foil. And I'm like, oh my gosh, do you recycle your foils? Because we do. We are a green circle salon, and we recycle 99% of the waste that we generate as a salon. So we do separate it out, and Green Circle takes those soiled foils and recycles them for us. It's an amazing service, and I highly recommend looking into it. Make sure you write my name down as a referral, and they'll take great care of you. I'm also using the Ecoheads shower heads. I love these shampoo handles. They're amazing. You can put them on any sink. They have converter kits for any kind of sink. They're amazing. We've been using them forever, but the water pressure is great, and it has an incredible filter. Our building doesn't have the best water, but with the filter we have on the main system and with the Ecoheads, the water is amazing. So as you can see, I'm kind of taking a look here. The foils look beautiful, blended. It looks amazing. She's slightly warm from that band. You could see that yellow, but it's okay. I know the exact toner to use to take that out. So the toner that I'm going to be using is the Rusk Xpress Gloss. I'm going to be using 9VR and 9P. This is my favorite icy toner. My guest told me she wanted to be icy, and I want to give her as cool of a result as I possibly can. She does have a lot of yellow in the hair, so the 9VR and the 9P will be beautiful on her. This tones in only 5 minutes and gives you 25 washes. I did add a little bit of the BN series just to give it a little bit of brightness, and I always go to this toner. My favorite toners are NAG, Natural Ash and Gold. That's what I used before the service, and my second favorite toner is the 9VR 9P, and sometimes I'll add the BN. But I'm going in and I'm using the Rusk developer. You can use their Zero Lift developer. They have all universal developers now, so you don't have to carry a bunch of different ones. All right, beautiful. So we are just rinsing out the conditioner that I left in there, and we're gonna apply the gloss. So I wanna apply it on wet hair, but I don't want it to be sopping wet. So I just went in, rinsed the conditioner, and then kind of wrung out the hair a little bit. And we're going right in with that Express Gloss. Remember, it's only 5 minutes of a processing time. If you leave it on longer, it's not gonna get darker per se, it's just going to be more pigmented. So if you wanted more of a rosy color, the 9VR will get a little bit rosier the longer you leave it on, but it's really nothing crazy or vibrant or dark or anything like that. It's definitely a game changer having the 5-minute toners. I did not trust them at first, but now I use them on almost everybody. It looks different on everyone, you know, depending on how they lift. So I highly recommend it to anyone who is looking to improve their timing behind the chair and who are looking for some really good blonde toners. The 9VR and the 9P is one of my absolute favorites. Let's chat about toning really quick. So just so you know, with most toners, every minute that you leave it on is 1 wash. So if you have a regular toner that's non-progressive and you leave it on for 20 minutes, that should be theoretically 20 washes. So you want to make sure you're formulating properly so that you can get that full processing time to get the best results. So with the Rusk Xpress Gloss, it's 5 minutes for 25 washes. So my goal is to leave it on the full 5 minutes, and I start the processing time right when a majority of the gloss is on. If you have guests who have really porous hair or really damaged hair, or who have a really porous hairline and you're nervous about the gloss taking too much, you can always use this little hack. You can put some white conditioner down first and then apply the gloss. And what that's going to do is give a tiny little barrier so it doesn't pull too dark. You can also apply an express gloss like this that's progressive, starting in the root area first or in the crown area first, and then doing the ends last. And this is going to give you a root melt effect without having to use 2 different colors. So theoretically, if I did want to root melt her, I might use the 6NB, start at the crown in the little teardrop section where she wants the depth, and then I'll work my way out doing her hairline and the ends last. And she would have a beautiful little root melt without having to do too much. As you can see, it's processing beautifully, and we're just about done with the processing time. Enjoy this time lapse where you can just watch it process and get a little bit more toned over 5 minutes. So you can see it working. It's getting nice and icy. It really does pack a punch. And I'm so confident in this toner. I use it on everybody, so many people. But my other favorite toner to use is NAG, Natural Ash Gold. This has been one of my go-to toners my entire career. And I always say, if you don't know what to use, just use NAG. Do a natural, an ash, and a gold. With Rusk, their 9A is actually 100% violet, so it's actually perfect because ash doesn't really live at a level 9, so usually your 9A is going to be primarily violet. It depends on what color line you use, but with Rusk, that's pretty much how it goes. Looks so good. We're rinsing her out, and we started the application around 1:12 and she was ready to rinse by 1:18. So we're just doing a quick thorough rinse, a nice shampoo, and a nice conditioner. The shampoo I chose to rinse her out was the Rusk VHAB shampoo and the Rusk Color RX shampoo. I cocktailed them together. The VHAB has some blonding benefits, and the Color RX is a really great color shampoo. So I'm using those, mixing them together, and applying the shampoo in the sink here. And I'm just doing that to get all of the color out, stop the processing, and give her a nice shampoo. It does have a beautiful lather. I really do love how this lathers up and the experience you can give while shampooing. My guest is really excited at this point because, you know, throughout the service, I'm getting her hyped up. I'm letting her know how things are going, letting her know of any setbacks. And throughout the entire process, I was just like, yeah, we're making great time. Your hair is lifting beautifully. Your hair feels good. And at this point, she's not so stressed and anxious anymore. She's really excited. So here we go, starting the blow dry. I use the K18 leave-in mask. I also used the Leaf and Flower anti-frizz spray and the 7-minute blowout. And my assistant Alexandra and I, thanks Alexandra for filming this tutorial, we're blow drying and we're just doing a flat wrap technique. So we're just using flat paddle brushes and we're just following her head like a roller and just smoothing down that base. And then we're going to round brush her and curl her. My favorite round brushes to use are the Olivia Garden long barrel brushes. I love those brushes. The blow dryer I'm using is the Babyliss Pro. It is a little heavy, but it is a powerful blow dryer and we absolutely love it. It is a little heavy though. I'm going to go in and curl her here with my Bioionic long barrel curling iron. I've had this forever, one of my favorite tools. And as you can see, her hair looks beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And we've gotten rid of so much of that banding. It is definitely not all gone, but a majority of the banding is gone. And she has a beautiful, beautiful base now to maintain. You can see that blend, her natural gray, it's just kind of shining through. It looks beautiful. She panicked during the service a little bit. She was like, is it too ashy? And I was like, you asked for ash, number one. Number two, no, it's not. You're still pretty warm. And she saw it in a different light and was like, okay, I love it. So I had to keep my cool there because I was like, oh my God, does she really not like it right now? Like, how am I going to get this toner out and not damage her hair? I could definitely do like a color oops or something like that, but I did not want to process her hair anymore. And this was the end result. And I'm going to kind of pick through it here and just show you the results of getting rid of that band. Her style looks good. Her hair is so healthy and her gray is blended. And it was such a great transformation and it was really fun to do. I love doing foils and I'm sure you do too if you're watching this video. So I hope you learned so much from it and I hope that, you know, these techniques and these tips will help get you through your next gray transformation or your gray blending transformation when you're using foils. All right, so we went over so much in this video. I showed you guys my sectioning that I always use. We went through how to weave. We went through some color placement. We talked about horizontal, diagonal, and vertical placement. We talked about which weaves are best for gray blending. Remember, those are between 7 and 12, depending on your section size. We talked about how to foil efficiently, how to tone, and we just went through so much. I hope that you loved this video and that you took away a lot from it. You guys are probably wondering about pricing. so I'll let you know how I priced this service. For her first appointment, I did not charge her for her service. Instead, I asked her to buy all of the products that I recommended. The total product ticket was about $350. I recommended her, you know, my favorite Regiment, which is the Virtue Labs Recovery Shampoo and Conditioner, the Leaf and Flower Sprays, the K18 mask, all of those things to make sure her hair was perfect. So her retail ticket was pretty high, and I was comfortable doing her cut and toner complimentary so I can prep her for today. The service took about 4 hours to complete. I did not have to curl her, so I did comp that curling service. I wanted to do it for the picture, so I just comped it for her, and we finished in just about 4 hours, which is exactly what I quoted her. I billed her at $150 an hour, bringing the total service price to about $600, and that is a great price.
If you love this video, please leave me a comment below so I can share the testimonials with people who would benefit from this education. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check your course content for the audio program.